Hello and welcome to the Fire Officer Project podcast, a show where we will discuss and learn together about topics specific to the American Fire Service. Come along as we explore areas such as firehouse traditions and culture, the fire family life, leadership, as well as getting yourself ready to be the company officer. This show is for everyone from the rookie firefighter to newly promoted officers. I'm your host, Mark McCurdy. Now let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to the second installment of the Fire Officer Project. In this bonus episode, with the 20th anniversary of 9/11 approaching in approximately a week, I wanted to finally put together this piece where I have talked about on Instagram and my first episode, reading some excerpts from a book from Dr. Brown and speaking to 9/11. It's amazing it's already been 20 years, but I believe this story needs to continue to be told. So enjoy this episode, and if you like what you hear, be sure to share it on to friends as we remember 9/11/2001. And here we go with this bonus episode. I've stopped and started this thing so many times that I finally decided to forget it. I'm just going to push record. I have it kind of bullet pointed out on how I want to do things, but I think what's happening is I'm trying to think too hard on this and trying to get this story correct and worrying about it being perfect. But as that day as 9/11/2001, or as many incidents have happened over the past 20 years, the raw emotion and stress that comes out of people when they're in the midst of something catastrophic or big can sometimes just show their character. So I'm just going to let this thing record, go for it as much as I can. But what you're going to get in this episode is an explanation of this story of 9/11/2001 with the FDNY, a family tie that I have with it. And the best way to do that is just for me to bullet point a few spots and kind of explain what's going on, read a few sections from the book, and then pass on to you how to get the book. My recommendation, of course, would be to read it because it's an amazing story, and I'm not even going to scratch the surface necessarily on the whole story itself. I think it's better told by Dr. Brown himself. I'm just going to read pieces of it to kind of tie together what I'm talking about, and then you'll see the rest as it goes. But just a warning initially, there is some language in the book. I don't know what I'm going to say, but as I read the book, I'm going to read it as it's written. So there is some language. So language warning if you have any youngsters in the car or where you're listening to this, just don't want you to be caught off guard. So I call this a bonus episode because it's not necessarily what this podcast is about, but I do think it's appropriate for the time that we're in with 20 years anniversary of 9/11 coming up. And my initial plan was to break this down and go more in depth into the book and read certain sections and explain it. But if I was to do that, it's almost like reading the whole thing as an audiobook. And I know that's not what should be done here. But I do feel the story, the nuts and bolts of the story should be told. So I'm going to read certain pieces from it and go from there. And things will pop into my head if I'm not reading it because it's just easier. It just happens that way. It's just a natural flow. Like I said, I don't want to keep stopping and starting and trying to polish this thing because it's almost better with just straight emotion on these certain specific episodes. So as I stated, I was going to break this down longer, but what I'm going to do is just wrap it all into one episode. We're only a week from 9/11, and it's an amazing story that can be told the way I think I've written it down. I've tried to write it out multiple times over the past few weeks and scripted it and everything else, and it's not worth it. So what I'm going to do is just do what I initially said, just explain certain pieces and then go from there. As I set this up and I try to chronologically do it, it's going to kind of bounce around, and I'm going to try to make sense of it for you so I'm not confusing the heck out of everyone. But to bring it around, I've been with my wife since 2004, and that's a decent amount of time. But through that whole time, I was introduced to her East Coast family after 9/11. And there's a section in the book that I'll explain and it'll tie it together. But in my first episode, I kind of explained a lot of my background and basically wanting to do this job as a fireman since I was at least 15, but even younger. And I remember, and I think a lot of people do, May 14th of 1991, this rope rescue that was in the middle of Manhattan with Rescue One and Kevin Shea, and it's on YouTube. I don't need to set up the whole story. It's an amazing rescue. But the lieutenant at that time was Lieutenant Brown, Paddy Brown. And I remember seeing a Time Life magazine of that picture. It's the famous picture that everybody's seen, black and white, fireman hanging off of a rope over a building with a civilian that he's hanging onto. That exact picture I had cut out and was on my notebook. I carried in 91, I would have been in 10th grade. And I carried that on my notebook for a couple of years. But never did I think 15 years later, I would be introduced to her and have this connection to this 9/11 story and Paddy Brown and Mike Brown and the whole story. So it's just a weird life coincidence that happened. I guess, well, none of us figured 10 years later, 2001, that this would happen. But let me get back on track. So 2004, my wife starts PA school, or physician assistant school. And the first year, it's almost like paramedic school, but not accelerated necessarily, but longer. Well, definitely accelerated. It's a master's program. So 1 year of didactic and then 1 year of internships, basically. Every month she was rotating for the next year. And one of the years she needed to be with the physician, and she was able to move around. One of the spots was in Las Vegas, specific to that category she needed to work on. Well, Mike Brown, the author of What Brothers Do, that's the book that I'm speaking about, him and his wife Janet lived in Las Vegas. And post 9/11, my father-in-law, or soon-to-be father-in-law, they have been reunited, and I'll read that section in the book. So long and short, my wife, girlfriend at the time, stays with Mike and Janet in Las Vegas for that month. And I drove out there on my days off or my 4 days and would stay and visit with them and get to know them a little bit better, and visit her because she was going to be gone for a month. And then I'd drive back to work, and then she came back. But I was able to visit with Mike and learn more of the story, but it wasn't always just about 9/11. He was a great person, and his mannerisms and the way he spoke and everything was awesome. He was just a great person. So one day he gave me a copy of this book that he wrote, and it's called What Brothers Do. And now when you buy it off of Amazon, it's a bound book, soft covered book, and it looks super professional. And that's because it had gone through a few different editions and covers, but the story remains the same. This first copy that I have, and it's sitting right here as I reach for it. You can imagine writing a story and typing on a computer, and you print it out, and you have 8.5 by 11 sheets, and you have this long story. And this first book is just over 150 pages, spiral bound with a clear cover, 8.5 by 11 sheets, a picture on the front, and Mike's information. So look at that, and look at how raw and how well it's done. And on the inside, he wrote a little note to me on it, and it has the date 7/27 of 2006. And all I wrote was, "Mark, I hope you enjoy the book," and signed Mike. And I read that book multiple times, and I still read it multiple times. And it's the same story that I'm going to share these sections. But now, as it's gone through a couple, not editions, but the way it was bound and the way it was sold and everything it looks like a regular book, which is great. But I still treasure this first copy. It sits on my nightstand by the side of my bed with a few other choice books that I have, and it's always there. And it's nice to see that original copy, but also to have this newer version. So that's where that all started from. And what I just want to do is jump into reading the intro of the book. It wasn't in the initial original copy, but as he's written it and redone a few things, he wrote the introduction to it. And I just want to start by reading that, because it's very difficult to try to put 16 years of experience and little memories that pop up and things, because after being together with my wife in 2004, we went back to 9/11 for 9/11 in New York every year in September, up until we had kids in 2011. We were going every year, and with Mike and Janet and family members and friends, and we were part of this experience of every year remembering what had happened. And then after kids, it makes it a little bit more difficult, so we weren't going back, but we were still staying in contact with them. But as I read this introduction, just it's just good to hear because it's Mike and how he writes and how he spoke and talked and what this book's about. So let me start here. Introduction. Everything of value takes effort. Reading takes effort, forces thought, and therefore gives life more value and meaning. A book is a time machine. It doesn't change with the opinions of the day or tell how it should have been. A book tells how it was. And I'm going to pause for a second because this book was written, or at least the story, very soon after 9/11. So as he states, a time machine. It's like a stamp in time, this story. And a few things that I've been through in life, and you think, oh, I should write this down because you're going to miss the minute details. And that's what's great about this book is there's so many minute details that will stay time stamped because he wrote it all down. Back to the story. Since the beginning of humanity, we have protected what is ours, what has value. When your village was attacked, the community would come together to fight off the attackers and rebuild. What Brothers Do is the same kind of story, our village being New York City. Read What Brothers Do, and if you are able, read it with a New York accent. Climb upon my shoulder and let me take you through this amazing story. Discover what a hero firefighter and person my brother Patrick was. Discover how the great community of first responders came together when the village was attacked. Read. You will laugh, you will cry, and you may even get pissed off. It was what it was. Our village survived and rebuilt, but the scars still run deep, nearly 20 years later, which is why I had to relaunch this book. We cannot let an entire generation come into this world and not understand why this attack was so crucial in world history. It was not an attack on New York. It was an attack on the United States of America using the World Trade Center, a huge symbol of the success of our republic, as a target. The attack proved the bizarre nature of the terrorists' long, careful, planned something so preposterous that even the most evil American mind could not fathom it, to attack our prosperity and spirit. Thousands of casualties later, beyond those who were incinerated, crushed, or even worse, jumped to their deaths, there were 343 FDNY heroes, many more police and other first responders who lost their lives, conducting the greatest rescue effort ever known to man. The only good that came from this tragedy was the resulting unity of the American people. Our country still mourns, and we still bear our scars in our hearts and minds. What Brothers Do is about healing. It is an ongoing process. So instead of continuing into reading certain sections of the book, let me just give you the nuts and bolts of the story. Mike is a doctor in Las Vegas. He was an FDNY firefighter for approximately 4 years and then wanted to go to med school. So he went to med school, and I'm shortening the story tremendously because everything's explained in his book. And he decided to go to medical school and lands in Las Vegas as an ER doctor. On the morning of 9/11, he's at work and he explains what that whole emotion is like, seeing what's going on as we all did, and still being in the ER and trying to figure out what he needs to do, knowing that his brother, FDNY Captain now, Patrick Brown, would have been at the World Trade Center. There are so many videos on YouTube and the rope rescue and so many things over the career of Patrick Brown on YouTube that I will do a tremendous disservice if I try to explain it. So if you're interested, look up FDNY Captain Patrick Brown. And it's good to see kind of his, when you actually see somebody on video versus just hearing a story about them, it does more justice than just listening to somebody talk and try to explain how somebody is. Mannerisms and language and inflection and voice and everything else is such a big thing that I point you to the direction of looking for videos to kind of see who he was as a firefighter. A huge hero, although based on what I've seen, I never met him personally, although I wish I had. And talking to Mike, a super humbled person, like most firemen. But he did so much in his career that it's amazing. Like I said, I wouldn't even do justice if I tried to even start down that road. So to look at that, go ahead and YouTube that, and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. So in a nutshell, Mike's a doctor in New York. This is going down, or excuse me, correct. He's a doctor in Las Vegas, and he's watching what's going on in New York. His whole plan is to get back there to try to find his brother because they can't get a hold of him. No planes, no trains, no anything. So what's the next logical thing that somebody would do? Get in their car and drive. He drives all the way from Las Vegas to New York, and there's a tremendous amount of story in between that I won't even touch on because it's just an amazing read on how it's written and how it flows. So I'm going to just take some of the sections of the book and explain what those are. Basically, it's just a few descriptions of what he first experienced as he comes to New York to try to start this journey to find his brother. A piece where my now father-in-law, who worked for Glendale Fire and retired in 2009 as a captain, is mentioned in the book. And at the very last few sections, I want to read about the nearing of the end of the story. I don't want to give it away quite yet. So let me get to the book, and I'm going to also throw in some audio from YouTube on here. So it's not just me talking, because some of the emotion that comes through on just hearing the audio is going to be big. So I'll tie that in also. Let me get here to the page that I want to read. So as I set it up, he's driven all the way from Vegas to New York, and he's trying to get his bearings again, being back in the city. Not only is it a little bit tough of a city to try to realize where you're going, but you can imagine the stress of trying to figure out what his next plan of attack is. So he's wandering around trying to figure out where I should go. He's made it to the city, and he's going to go to his brother's station. So we pick it up here, and it says, I continue to follow the rules of Brownian motion. So that's their last name, Brown. I found myself heading back across 14th Street and past an all but abandoned Virgin record store. Music was just another casualty. It had lost all importance. I headed south on 4th, and at the corner of 13th Street, my search was over. Across the street was a small, 2-story, red brick building with 2 large American flags out front. The huge garage door was open and revealed the front of an older replacement hook and ladder fire truck. On the front of the grill was a large 3 that someone had fashioned out of white duct tape. There were firemen and civilians standing out front, and on both sides of the open door were numerous cards, posters, candles, and flowers. To the right of the door, almost completely hidden by flowers, was what looked like a wooden bench. A passing young woman knelt down in front of the bench and relit one of the candles. She then gave each fireman a loving hug and continued on her way. As I worried about what to say when I got to the group, I took a deep breath and crossed the street to the firehouse. And that's the end of the chapter 7. Chapter 8 is as he approaches Ladder 3, Battalion 6 station. And here we are back to the book. Firemen are the typical strong, silent American males. They don't like to let outsiders know what they're really thinking. They're suspicious of strangers and open up only to close friends, family, and other firemen who, over time, also come to be considered family. But that's a generalization. On an individual basis, I've known my share of firemen who were as safe as a pet crocodile, but even they would stop at nothing to drag you out of a fire. So here I was, the last thing they needed, the civilian brother of their captain. There was a high probability that they'd lost 12 of the 25 men from their firehouse, 12 of their brothers, 12 of their closest confidants. They cooked together, ate and slept in the same firehouse, played with one another's kids, helped each other move, fought the same fires, fought each other, froze together in the winter, went into burning buildings in the heat of summer, celebrated when they saved a victim, and grieved with each lifeless body they recovered. They drank at each other's weddings, drank after each other's divorces, and now here I was. The firemen standing in front of the firehouse were wearing work uniforms, dark blue T-shirts with a Maltese cross on the front and Ladder 3 over the top of it. The house nickname Recon was printed under the cross. As I walked up to them, I was greeted with that typical guarded, "What the fuck do you want?" fireman look. But before I could even speak, they saw the family resemblance and reached out their hands. "Oh, shit, you're the captain's brother. You're the doctor from Vegas? How'd you get here?" all of them asked. "What do you need?" I was offered everything from a place to stay in their homes to the use of their cars. Ladder 3 was a senior house, which meant that the average member had more than 15 years on the job. There was Tim Brady, who was hired the same year that I was. And remember, because Mike was an FDNY fireman too. He had a large mustache and a broken heart from giving up hope. John Gates, about 6'3", with a warm, friendly smile, was still holding on to the belief that someone would be found alive. Brendan Gullion, who was named after the Irish saint and traveler, posed a unique accent, equal parts Irish brogue and New York street. He also had a quick Irish wit with an Irish temper. Brendan may have been transferred to Pat's company for, let's say, violent outbursts. But he was quick to remind me that he wasn't the only one at 3 Truck to act on impulse. You know, Mike, I was supposed to be the problem, but your brother was something, Brendan recalled. One day we were going to a call and a truck was blocking us. Refuses to move out of the way. Cap runs up to the truck, and the guy tells him to go fuck himself. So he pulls this guy out of the truck and starts to beat the shit out of him, and it was me who had to stop him from killing the guy. I met Jim Wind, a big man with a drooping mustache, barrel chest, and a deep, thoughtful voice. Never one to waste words. He, in turn, introduced me to Bobby Burke, a good friend of your brother's. Shaking my hand, Bobby said, Mike, I'm your brother's best friend, and I'm here if you need anything. Bobby, tall and thin with tight, muscular arms, was the only one in the group who was not wearing an FDNY t-shirt. His voice sounded so familiar, but I couldn't place it. Then a Firehouse public address page scored a direct hit to my central nervous system. Captain Brown. For a brief moment, the randomness of my thought process tangled with my space-time journey and mixed with irrational hope for that very brief moment. The impossibility of the World Trade Center being attacked by 2 hijacked airliners was in fact impossible. My brother was just about to walk down the stairs and greet me with, Hey Mike, you didn't have to drive all the way from Vegas. I'm fine, see? Captain Brown, you have a visitor up front. Again, another shot. Dan Brown was the covering captain for Ladder 3. He'd been transferred there indefinitely until Pat was found and could return to work. Dan possessed some of the great qualities as my brother. He was intelligent. He was quiet, he was intelligent, and he was fully aware of the volatile situation he'd been thrown into. He had many years on the job in the FDNY. Like everyone else, he had close friends now buried under the rubble of the World Trade Center. But he couldn't fall prey to the roller coaster of despair followed by good news and then the crush of any hope over and over again. Dan Brown had a Firehouse to run. When he saw me take that central nervous system hit as his name was announced, he quickly realized that I was not the only one reacting that way. From that point on, he told everyone to refer to him as Captain Dan. He invited me to the kitchen in the rear of the building, where we can talk, he said. We walked the length of the floor and into a small kitchen. Bobby silently followed. There were several men around the long, wide wooden table. I was introduced to them all and shook many hands. They offered me a seat. Each one knew Pat, and respect they had for him was obvious. The battalion chief, Richie Bourbon, told me, Your brother and I did not see eye to eye, but we respected each other. He is one of the best firefighters I've ever met. Jim Elson, a retired captain, worked with Pat at Manhattan's Elite Rescue 1. They were close friends for more than 20 years. He was sitting at the table with a dirty fire coat draped over his knees. This is your brother's, he said. It was found in the rubble this morning. Amazingly, it was Jim's son, also a firefighter, who had come across it. Reasons that the turnout code had been found by itself were discussed. Some wonder if Pat had taken it off to be able to run up more flights of stairs, or maybe he'd given it to a victim, or it was an old spare coat that someone else had grabbed when rushing to the site. The site, in quotations, was what the World Trade Center was being called. None of the firemen were using the media's ground zero cliche. It was a site that had stolen a piece of their soul from every man in that kitchen. The site that had turned their eyes red and air they were breathing into fire. The sight that was keeping them up at night with the ceaseless, haunting question, why was I chosen to be on top of the pile and not under it? Bobby seemed to know a few of the firemen, and I just assumed that he'd been hanging out when I came along. Dan took a seat across the table and handed me a cup of coffee. He spoke about the possibility of voids, spaces around which the buildings collapsed, leaving pockets of survival. As I'd suspected back in Vegas, Pat and the other members of Ladder 3 were operating in the North Tower. Currently, the area of the North Tower was quite unstable. The last crew down there was almost buried alive when a wall collapsed on them. Those 6 firefighters jumped into a fire truck just as the debris fell and had to be dug out. This was the reason that I had received on the road from Mark, that they were finding a multitude of firemen alive. It's just too dangerous, Dan said. We're waiting for a large crane they're bringing in before we can go back. It was easy to figure out what Captain Dan was really saying in his calm, business-like voice. We have lost too many, and we are not going to jeopardize anyone else. Examining the turnout coat, Jim Ellison commented to me, If there's anyone who could walk out of that place alive, it would be your brother, Paddy. Several other firemen agreed. Dan leaned across the table toward me. Your brother's locker is upstairs at the end of the room. The keys to his apartment and his car are in it. There's no rush, Mike. Take all the time you need to look at what else is in there. All the time I need? That's my brother's stuff. I'm not going anywhere near his locker. He'll kick my ass. Dan leaned in closer and asked in that calm, steady voice, Mike, what do you need? I need to go to that site. And without hesitation, without total understanding, Dan leaned back and said, okay. And that's the close of chapter 8. And I wanted to continue on because as they're waiting to get ready to go down to the Ground Zero site and try to start looking for the 12 members of Ladder 3, I want to pick up a piece here in the book that's within the next few pages. And remember, this isn't within the first few days after 9/11. Back to the book here. It says, the firehouse phone rang again. A fireman named Dennis came over. Mike, there's a John Preston on the phone for you. He says he's your cousin. My cousin? I don't even know a John Preston. Dennis spoke in the receiver for a minute, then turned back to me. He says he's a fire captain from Los Angeles. You sure he wants me? Dennis patiently listened to the voice on the other end of the line once more, then turned back to me. He says you know him as Jay Mooney. I did have a cousin, Jay Mooney, but hadn't had any contact with him for about 40 years. When Pat and I were very young, Jay was like another brother. He and his family moved to California when he was 7 or so, and we never heard from him again. A few years ago, I thought about tracking him down, but never followed through. Now, here he was on Ladder 3's phone, and quickly brought me up to date. Jay was now a captain in the Glendale Fire Department, and much like me, played softball and brought the beer supply to the game. He promised he'd come to New York very soon. And that piece there is the start of the connection of the Browns and Jay, who is my father-in-law. Now, he wouldn't become my father-in-law or I wouldn't be part of the family for a few years, but that was that first piece that started it. And then I was brought into the family and explained the story and got to meet Mike. And from basically that point on, they were connected through this tragedy, but brought back together. As you can see, when they were younger, they were a family back east. There's a tremendous amount of story left in between that details everything that goes on as Mike attempts to find Paddy and as the members of Ladder 3 try to find not only their members from their firehouse, but any other members or civilians. There's a large amount of story left, and I don't feel it's right to try to break this whole thing down. So I'm trying to do it as best I can in sections. It's been 20 years. There's no surprise that Paddy and 11 of the members of Ladder 3 that left out the door that morning never came back. So I don't feel like I'm giving anything away there. But what I do want to read, because we went back to New York March of 2021, and we took our children with us this time because we had a family event that we needed to be at. And this section I'm going to read next is longer, but it's an amazing piece, and we were able to go and show our children this exact point and explain to them what you're about to hear. And so that kind of brings it around, listening to this whole piece and trying to put it all together and impacting of this story. So I'm going to pick it up here. It's a little bit longer, but it's a very good explanation of what happened months after this whole event started. And the section I'm going to read about is Paddy's memorial. And what's amazing about it is it was at St. Patrick's Cathedral in the middle of Manhattan on a Friday. And I want to take the time to read through this and really set it up and try to get you all to feel what that would be like. And some of this, even when I read it multiple times, you still get that frog in the throat type thing because it's an amazing story, especially when we're concentrated here on this podcast about fire department and fire family and everything that occurs with it. And it's just more than a job. It's a lifestyle, and your family members are tied in, your wives or girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever it may be, in-laws, mother-in-laws, parents. But as I get off on a tangent here, I'm bringing myself around because it's a little difficult to read, but it is an amazing thing, and I want to make sure I do a good job here. So on the morning of November 9th, and why that's significant is November 9th is Pat's birthday. So they hadn't found him yet, but he was going to be the last to be memorialized, and they picked November 9th. On the morning of November 9th, a very large group of our family and friends, maybe 50 or 60, gathered at Campbell's. That was the funeral home. When everyone had arrived, we all loaded into the vehicles that would take us the 30 blocks south to St. Patrick's Cathedral. A fire department pumper would carry Pat's helmet displayed on an American flag made of flowers. There were 2 firemen on the back step, guarding and honoring the helmet. Steve Brown would ride in 3 truck, which would immediately follow the pumper. The next vehicle in the procession would be the limo carrying my father, my sister Carolyn, her husband, my father's close friend Rosalind, and Rosalind's grandson. Jane and I would ride in a second limo accompanied by Donnie, the news, Michael Daly, and Bobby and his wife Blair. At first, there was some confusion over who would ride in our limo, but just like everything else, we got it right. Jim Carney had arranged for a tour bus to transport the large number of people who were close to Pat. The bus fell in line as one by one the vehicles slowly pulled away from the curb. The procession made its way slowly down Fifth Avenue that autumn morning. We had a police escort that blocked each intersection, allowing us to proceed unimpeded. An errant car pulled in front of us and stopped. Donnie almost jumped out of the limo to take the driver's head off. After a few New York words were exchanged, we started up again. The group inside our limo talked about all the time, an effort that had gone into the planning of the day's events, and wondered how it was going to work out. We were all concerned about the number of people who would show up. About 2 weeks before, I'd considered asking my fellow volunteer firemen from Long Island to help fill the ranks, but I never got around to it. We stopped on Fifth Avenue, 3 blocks north of the cathedral, and I noticed there was something missing, something so obvious, but so foreign to New York City that it was not immediately apparent to us. It was the quiet. Midtown Manhattan on a Friday was quiet. The motorcade briefly stopped, and we saw Steve Brown jump out of ladder 3 and run up to our limo. He frantically banged on the window, not even waiting for Donnie to open it fully before he began speaking. "There are thousands, it's packed." From his vantage point, 2 vehicles ahead of us, he could see the crowd in front of St. Patrick's. His eyes shone with delight and relief. He then told us he just received word that HBO was doing a special and wanted permission to film in the cathedral. Another decision. Steve McCarthy was still doing his story about Pat from NBC, and I didn't want to steal his thunder, so I called him. He told me that the more people who knew about Patty, the better. I told Steve Brown, HBO, or anyone else who can place their cameras anywhere they want. Cell phone to his ear, Steve rushed back to his seat in ladder 3. It was a major relief that Pat would have the turnout he deserved. But I still had a major problem. I didn't know what I was going to say, and now HBO cameras would be rolling, catching every unrehearsed word. Once Steve left, the deafening quiet returned for just a moment before it was broken by the gut-wrenching dirge crying out of the bagpipes. The wail was accompanied by the sound of a bass drum that kept time as the FDNY's Emerald Society pipes and drums slowly led the procession to its ultimate destination. The mournful sound sent shivers up my spine and tears to my eyes. 3 tremendous horses carrying mounted police officers closely followed. Like archangels, they guarded the fire truck carrying Pat's helmet to the steps leading into St. Patrick's Cathedral. The limo started to move again, and as we got closer to the church, the magnitude of the event became apparent. On the right were firefighters from all over the world, lined up 7 deep for several blocks. On the left were the civilians, hundreds and hundreds of them hurled in the chill, standing silent and still, paying their respects to a real New York hero. Paddy Brown's best friends, his inner circle, did this for him. They closed down the biggest city in the world on a Friday afternoon. Bobby and I were breathless. Paddy would not have had it any other way. "He is loving this," I can almost hear him saying. "Good job, little brother." I find myself wishing that Pat's body had been found so this could be a funeral and not a memorial. He was still buried at the site or was part of the dust in the air that we were breathing, but his body was not here in the procession. All we had left was an old helmet and the spirit of New York City. And I'm going to stop there, but there is numerous names of people that are in that section that you may be wondering who they are, but if you were to read the whole story, it all ties in very well. It's amazing that we were able to take our children there and stand in front of that cathedral and explain to them what happened so many years ago. And they were in awe of seeing it. And it's amazing when you stand there and just look at that cathedral and think that thousands of people standing there waiting to pay tribute to a hero. And just to further get a description, I'll read one more section. Back to the story here. We'd finally reached our destination, and we all stepped out of the limo. The dignitaries silently greeted us. Mayor Giuliani, former New York Governor Kerry, and Fire Commissioner Von Essen were all standing in the cold waiting for us. This is class, Pat. This is for you. Across Fifth Avenue, 2 ladder trucks had their ladders extended high with a huge American flag hanging between them. It was an awesome sight. The 4 men from Ladder 3, carrying the flag of flowers with Pat's helmet atop it, slowly started making their way into the cathedral. 4 men from Engine 69, Ladder 28, each at a corner of my father's wheelchair, gently lifted and carried him with respect and dignity up the wide stone steps. We joined the procession. Janet was on my right. Steve Brown escorted us on my left. We walked alongside Janet as we walked past the massive brown doors at the front entrance and into the church. I had never been in St. Patrick's Cathedral before, but I immediately saw the reason Pat wanted his funeral held here. Upon entering the huge church, I was reminded of the wedding scene in The Sound of Music. This wasn't a wedding celebration, but we'd make today a celebration of a life well lived. More than 3,000 people were already packed into the pews. There was a large section up front for the blind, Pat's former karate students. There were homeless folks present whom Pat had helped out on a regular basis with money, food, or kind words. There were people from every part of his life. Now, as I continue, the next 2 pieces I want to read are eulogies. Many dignitaries and many people had spoken at Pat's funeral. I just wanted to focus on 2. But I also want to acknowledge that there was a large amount of first responders killed, and I'm not trying to say that Pat is more important, and nobody here is, and that's not what this book is about. With 343 FDNY firefighters killed, 23 NYPD officers, and 37 Port Authority police officers, as well as thousands of civilians, people that have succumbed to 9/11 cancer since in those last 20 years. But I'm just focusing on this because this is what was in front of me and the connection that I have with family and this story. So I want to take this part to read a eulogy. That was Michael Daly's eulogy. And it's kind of long, but between him, Michael Daly, and one of the firefighters, survivors of Ladder 3, or one of the members that still remain of the 25, I'm going to read the next 2 pieces are going to be from them. So I'll pick it up here. It's a little bit long, but I think it's definitely worth understanding because it really gives you a description of Pat. And Mike writes, watching Mike Daly step up to the lectern brought me back to a discussion I'd had with Bobby weeks before. After the meeting at the W, we agreed we needed one more great speaker, perhaps the president, maybe the commandant of the Marine Corps. Bobby and I went over the pros and cons of each possibility, and then out of nowhere, as if Pat had placed the thought in my head, I said, how about Mike Daly? Do you think he'll do it? Bobby looked at me as if I had just parted the Red Sea, and as Mike began to speak, I realized why he was the perfect choice. His voice was soft at first, but the words powerful. They echoed off the walls of the great cathedral. It was a supreme eulogy for a dear friend. And just to bring everybody up to speed, Michael Daly is a writer, and he's more than that. He's written a book called The Book of Michael, which is the story of Father Michael Judge, the FDNY chaplain that was killed on 9/11. He's not only written that book, but as I look up, just so I don't want to mess up a better description of him, he's a special correspondent with the Daily Beast, an article written in New York. He was previously a columnist with the New York Daily News and a staff writer with New York Magazine. He was also a Pulitzer Prize, a finalist for the commentary in 2002, and has received numerous awards. And as I said, he's the author of The Book of Michael, another book called Underground, and Topsy. And I'm reading that because I wanted to look it up and make sure I explain it right. I know who Michael Daly is, but I wanted to be able to be a little more descriptive of who he is. So you can imagine how this eulogy, how well written it'll be. And let me get back to the book of this eulogy with Michael Daly. Happy birthday, Paddy Brown. Son, brother, friend, student, teacher, sensei, Marine. gallant captain of the New York City Fire Department. First in, last out, even now. Much better men than I can tell you about Paddy Brown in a fire, how he was ever calm, ever steady, always thinking one step ahead, so uncommonly brave that the department was sometimes unsure whether to give him a medal or charges. The picture of the rope rescue on the back of his holy card truly is a holy picture. I can tell you how gently Paddy Brown stroked John Drennan's hair in the emergency room that night in 1994 when his friend was terribly burned fighting a fire on Watt Street. Being a firefighter, Drennan's first concern was for the others. Paddy did not have the heart to tell him that James Young was dead, and Chris Seidenberg seemed sure to follow. Drennan's condition did not seem much better. "How bad is it?" Drennan asked. "It's bad, John. Real bad," Paddy said. Drennan then bestowed on Paddy an honor that meant more to him than all the medals in the world. "I want you to take my spot until I come back." Paddy pledged to himself that he would also look after Drennan's family. Paddy spoke his first words to Drennan's wife, Vina. "I don't talk much, but I've been assigned to you." John Drennan was taken up to the burn unit where Paddy had himself twice been a patient. The memory of those ordeals came rushing back as Paddy stepped off the elevator, and he narrowly began his angel guardianship by passing out in front of Vina. "One thing you really don't want to do when you're a captain is faint," Paddy said. Paddy described the days that followed as being tougher than anything he had experienced in Vietnam. He stayed at the Drennan side through it all, saying just the right words to Vina and the kids, whispering assurances in their father's ear. On the 14th day, Paddy and Vina went down to Battery Park City, at the base of the World Trade Center. He thought to throw a coin into the river to wish for his friend's recovery. That didn't seem enough, and he threw a whole pocketful of change into the rushing water. But not even the entire city's prayers could save John Drennan. Paddy knelt at his friend's bedside and whispered, "Look, John, if you want to go, it's okay. It's okay, John, you can go. We'll take care of your family." A tear rolled down Drennan's cheek, and Paddy oh so tenderly wiped it away. After a biblical 40 days, John Drennan's struggle ended. Paddy stood with Vina in the room, just me and her, Paddy said afterward. "We cried over his body and stuff. It was kind of beautiful, you know." I had to hit pause there and step away for a minute because that last line, "it was kind of beautiful, you know," is something that family members or people that know Pat would say. And if you knew the story or you've heard that, then that's something that's been said before. So it kind of got me for a second because at our wedding, my father-in-law, when he gave his speech, said that at the end regarding how I asked him to marry his daughter. So it's still tough to hear or see that written as I read in the book, but I'm going to persevere. Okay, so it's not about me. It's about hearing this story. So back to the book as Michael Daly speaks of his friend. At the funeral, Paddy sat right here in the cathedral with Vina. Father Michael Judge said the Mass, and I am thankful none of us possessed the gift of prophecy. Paddy remained the Drennan's guardian angel. In Vina's words, when it was over, when it got lonely, when it got quiet, when it got scary, Paddy was there for us still. Men would come up to Vina and take her hand and look into her eyes and say, "Vina, how are you? How are the children?" Women would come up, take her hand, look into her eyes and ask, "Vina, what's Paddy Brown like?" If I recall correctly, there were at that time 17,846 women whose heart leapt at the mention of Captain Patrick Brown. That was just below 14th Street. And of course, the number grew each time he bounded out the door. I do not need to tell you who all the girls stared at during our monthly dinners at Zeno's restaurant. I can still hear Paddy's laugh as we sat in that happy circle. Peter McLaughlin and Terry Hatton and Dennis Mojica and Tim Brown and Ricky Sarantino and Father Michael Judge and a newspaper guy who felt a scribe of old who had been accorded the undeserved honor of a seat with the knights of the Round Table. I can still see Peter McLaughlin shining with life and goodness and charm. It just did not seem possible when he died in a fire. Nobody was more heartbroken than Paddy Brown, but Paddy was not one aching heartbeat slower in responding to a fire. If anything, he was even more determined when he faced the Red Devil who had taken his friend. He continued to show that being a firefighter is an even higher calling than knighthood. Firefighters are armored only by their courage and nobility. Nobody astride a steed was ever so brave as a firefighter crawling on his hands and knees into the blinding smoke and flames. The only instance on record when Patrick Brown showed fear was when he was given a baby to hold. What do I do? What do I do? Like Sir Lancelot, Paddy never married. He did find a true home at the firehouse on 13th Street. After all the years of antagonizing bosses and then wondering why they did not give him Rescue 1, Paddy decided that he could have been in no better place than 3 Truck. He put a teak bench outside and declared that he was exactly where he wanted to be. Everything kind of worked out, you know? There was no secret to his happiness. He loved his men, and they loved him. They discovered that a true hero arrives at his command on a bicycle wearing spandex shorts and unrolls a purple mat on the apparatus floor for a little yoga. He might even get the likes of Big Mike Moran to attempt a dancing Shiva. For a firehouse dinner, a true hero preferred grilled chicken Caesar salad. He naturally asked for the balsamic vinegar. Paddy's friends outside the firehouse already knew that a true hero lives in an apartment with a red rug that would make Martha Stewart one woman who had no use for Patrick Brown. And that when a true hero goes to Bed Bath & Beyond, he buys red towels to match that rug. A true hero also has a Mickey Mouse phone. A true hero may have made it a point to learn how to turn off the fuel if the president's helicopter ever crashes, but he cannot work a Mr. Coffee machine. A true hero buys coffee 2 at a time and only from the last mom-and-pop shop on 14th Street. A true hero is cherished among delivery men because he always tips them $5. A true hero gets his suits at Brooks Brothers, but wears them maybe once a year. A true hero decides to take up piano at age 40, hiring a teacher who shows up the first day asking for little Patrick. "That's me," Paddy announced. All of which is to say that a true hero is exactly himself, wherever he was in all his adventures. Be he chatting with a countess at the Silvanos or standing with a soot-blackened face at Waterside Tower, saying how brave everybody else had been without mentioning his own courage, or teaching karate to the blind, telling a student who had lost what little sight she had in a subway attack, "You can't give up. You got to keep going," or taking 3 Truck to Tompkins Square to drink egg creams and watch the East Village parade go by, or taking the same men to practice cutting a roof on a broiling summer day, or suddenly turning to you in a trendy Soho restaurant and saying how much it hurt to return home from Vietnam and be welcomed more like a criminal than a hero, or inviting Fina and Father Judge to dinner at his Fifth Avenue mansion and uptown home, Engine 69, or jogging to a happy sweat with James Remar, or speaking with such pride about his brother Mike, the doctor, but never mentioning Mike is about 2 feet taller, or telling you, "My father was a big guy in the FBI, a president honored him or something," or bouncing with excitement on the balls of his feet as he showed you the new thermal imager that let him peer through the smoke and for the first time really see the Red Devil. "I never knew this was so dangerous." And then that Paddy Brown laugh. Or watching his 4-year-old godson Dylan playing in Central Park on a sunny St. Patrick's Day. Or surprising yet another firefighter that the legendary Captain Brown was humble and even shy. Or laughing with his beloved Bobby Burke. Or giving you a little boy's grin from his boot camp group picture. The Marine recruit nicknamed Calm Down Brown, liking a camera even at Paris Island. Or mumbling that maybe there might be some little thing in Time magazine, which turns out to have a picture of him looking like Douglas MacArthur. Or checking on John Drennan's kids. Or prompting Father Judge to tell him, "God loves you, Paddy Brown, but you have to slow down." Or telling Father Judge, "Yeah, I know." Or once again searching for life in a blazing building. At all times, in all circumstances, Patrick J. Brown was precisely Patrick J. Brown, the one and only. And just as being all things to all people makes you shallow, being ever himself made Pat ever deeper as he charted his own particular way through life. He is the only person I have ever encountered who would be profound by saying kinda and sorta and you know. His guide words were Semper Fi, and as always, he had his Marine Corps pin on his chest when he was in the cathedral last May. The occasion was the Holy Name Society Communion breakfast, and as he filed out with the others, he once again proved nobody looks better in a uniform. I remember him saying, It's kind of nice to be here when nobody died. In June, I saw him again in white gloves outside another church, that occasion being Harry Ford's funeral. Ford had been one of the 3 to die in the Father's Day fire, and Paddy needed to say nothing at all for you to know how he felt. Just before the bagpipes played, Paddy spoke of something he called kinda beautiful. He had helped firefighter Jeff Giordano rescue a young woman from a fire just down 13th Street from the firehouse, and they tried to resuscitate her twice with no luck. But they were not going to give up, and they tried yet again. And then Paddy saw it, that most beautiful sight. The light of life coming back into Jessica Rubenstein's blue eyes. I just kept seeing those eyes, Paddy said. Paddy almost smiled and joined the formation outside the church and saluted Harry Ford's mortal remains as the bagpipes played. Brian Fahey's funeral was next, and then came John Downing's. Paddy Brown and all the others kept dashing to fires. On the morning of September 11th, Paddy arrived home at 3 Truck and wrote 0800, Captain Brown, RFD in the journal. RFD, reporting for duty. That D denoting the core of Paddy's life. Not an hour later, he and 3 Truck were racing to the World Trade Center. Paddy would not have had time to consider the poetry of pulling up right alongside Terry Hatton's Rescue 1. Paddy's thoughts would have already been in the tower, where more people needed help than at any single moment in the city's history. Don't go in there, Paddy, somebody supposedly cried. Are you nuts? We've got a job to do, Paddy said. In they all dashed, more bold than any knights, as brave as any Marines, climbing up flight after flight to meet the very devil himself. Tower 2 collapsed, and Paddy understood Tower 1 would soon follow. He got on the radio as calm as ever. Captain Brown, Ladder 3. 44th floor, exit is proceeding orderly. A chief ordered an evacuation. Firefighters have told Tim Brown that Paddy urged them on as they started back toward the street. Keep going, guys. Keep going. They called for Paddy to join them. Come on, Captain. Come on. Keep going, guys. Keep going. By one report, Paddy and the rest of 3 Truck found themselves on the 40th floor with 30 to 40 severely burned people. Mike Moran has noted that all these firefighters are strong and fit and could have easily fled to safety in those final minutes. But Paddy and 3 Truck would no sooner leave those burned people than they would have left John Drennan. Those suffering, terrified people could have had nobody better to die with. I picture Paddy still calm, still precisely Patrick J. Brown at the instant the light left his eyes. He and his men showing with their very presence that there are greater things than saving your own life, you know. When Tower 1 collapsed, anyone who knew Paddy knew he was still in there. I was standing at the distance you stand when you are not a hero, and when I stopped running, I was near the water's edge, where Paddy and Vina had stood 7 years before, tossing in a fistful of change for her husband. As I walked back to the stunned, eerie hush of what would become known as Ground Zero, I encountered Tim Brown. Ricky Sarantino was alive, but the rest of the round table was gone. Terry Hatton and Dennis Mojica and Father Judge and Paddy Brown. Today, Paddy's mortal remains are still down in that smoldering pile. Perhaps he continues to fight the devil. He always knew that the devil is not just fire. The devil is also indifference and callousness and materialism and disrespect and anything else that hardens the heart. To gaze upon that pile is to be challenged, to remember and honor Paddy and all those who perished with him, to live true to his everlasting example. You who are firefighters or police officers or paramedics or soldiers already do, and our debt to you is beyond paying. I have wondered how Paddy could be happy in heaven with all of us grieving below. I then remembered what Father Judge used to say. My God is the God of surprises. I think he meant that good always arises from the bad. I am hoping that the biggest surprise arising from September 11 is one the church teaches us should be no surprise at all. I pray the day will come when we will arrive in heaven to see Paddy at a big round table with our priest and all those knightly firefighters, and of course, John Drennan. There will be a Diet Coke, not Pepsi, no ice, maybe even a birthday cake. As Vina has predicted, John Drennan will say, Paddy, we're both brave, we're both tough, we're both true leaders, heroes who have done great things. But Paddy, I was married to Vina for 26 years, and there's no way I could have spent 40 days in a row with her. Paddy, you're the greatest. Then we'll hear Paddy laugh once more. He will laugh even louder when Vina arrives to take a seat next to her husband for eternity. And Father Michael Judge will say something else he always said. All is well. We can count on Paddy to make sure the table has lots of room for all of us who love and miss him, so on this first birthday without him, we'll all be together. And that will be kind of beautiful, you know? With that, Daly was done. Thunderous applause followed as he walked off the altar. He did it. Mike Daly said everything that needed to be said. I thought that maybe I wouldn't have to speak. I mean, what could I possibly add to that? And that's the end of the eulogy from Mike Daly. The next section I want to read is Mike Moran's eulogy. And the book that Dr. Brown writes explains as Mike comes up to the podium. And I'm going to read that. But he writes in detail an event that was a concert held at Madison Square Garden months before, after 9/11 as a benefit. And Dr. Brown here writes out everything that Mike Moran said at this concert, but it's on YouTube, and I'm going to play you the audio from that instead of me reading it because it helps break up you listening to me, but there's no way I will be able to do as good a repeat of the actual live thing. So I'm going to start reading the book section of description of the memorial on November 9th, but then I'm going to cut to the YouTube audio. So back to our story here. Then Mike Moran stepped up on the podium. Steve Brown had suggested at the W meeting that somebody from Ladder 3 should speak. I said sure, and when he told me it would be Mike, I thought it was another perfect choice. He was a giant of a man in his dress uniform and ready to speak to represent Pat's men. Cardinal Egan appeared a bit concerned about what might be said in his cathedral. Mike Moran's reputation to tell it like it is had preceded him. Most in the church already knew that Moran was a commanding speaker who had previous experience addressing a crowd slightly larger than the one in St. Pat's. Just weeks before, in front of a sold-out Madison Square Garden at the concert for New York City, and right before The Who was about to play, Big Mike Moran boldly and fearlessly walked up to the microphone in the middle of the stage and declared, and I'm going to play you the YouTube audio here.
All I can say, on behalf of my brother John, and the 12 members from Ladder 3 that we've lost, the 20 members of the New York City Fire Department football team that we've lost, and all the people from my neighborhood, my hometown, Rockaway Beach, Queens, New York, our friends, our neighbors, our relatives, they are not gone because they are not forgotten. And I want to say one more thing. In the spirit of the Irish people, Osama bin Laden, you can kiss my royal Irish ass.
Now, obviously, that was way better than me trying to explain it or read it from the book, but I will read the eulogy as written by Dr. Brown here. When Moran started speaking in St. Patrick's Cathedral, his voice was as strong and resolved as it had been in Madison Square Garden. On the morning of September 11th, enemies of the United States attacked the World Trade Center. Their followers rejoiced. They even danced in the streets. They thought they had achieved success. But they did not. They made the mistake on the morning of September 11th when all they saw when they looked at the World Trade Center was two buildings. What they failed to see was the nation that stood behind them. What they failed to understand was the terrible resolve they had awakened. And if there is justice in the afterlife, and I believe there is, those fanatics who crashed those planes into the World Trade Center did not get to meet Allah. They did not get 70 virgins. Instead, they met Patrick J. Brown, and they discovered they'd messed with the wrong Marine. Because you don't mess with 3-truck. You don't mess with Paddy Brown's guys, not when he's working. When Paddy first came to 3-truck, he earned our undying respect when on 2 different occasions, tough guys thought they could push Paddy or his guys around. They found out the hard way that Paddy was not only a black belt in karate, but also a heck of a boxer. He was what my father used to call good with his hands. We used to joke around in 3-truck and tell the officers that they were not in charge. They were just responsible. Well, we never, ever whispered that about Paddy because we all knew he was in charge. And not because he yelled, but because he spoke softly. He was humble. He led by example. He was bigger than life. Therefore, a simple request from him was like a shouted order from another. Late at night, you could usually find him in the kitchen talking with the guys. He liked to shoot the breeze with them. It is a testament to his character that with all the famous people he knew, all the mayors that pinned medals on his chest, all the big chiefs that were relieved when they saw his familiar visage enter the fireground, that Paddy liked nothing better than hanging out with the men. Because Paddy never stopped being a fireman. He only cared if you showed enthusiasm, if you were willing to learn. He didn't care how many bars you had on your collar. He only cared about the content of your character. Guys that had problems in other houses wanted to come to Ladder 3, not because the captain was soft, but because he was strong. He didn't prejudge you. He let you prove yourself to him, and the great thing about him was that you didn't want to let him down. We were becoming the Oakland Raiders of the fire department, and I will tell you this, we loved having him. He was not only a great storyteller, he was also a great listener. He took tremendous interest in the guys' lives and well-being. The funny thing is, most of us never realized that in those informal chats, the captain was teaching us. That's what he was doing. He was teaching us the fire department way, the 3-truck way, and most important, the Paddy Brown way. He was respected and loved because he lived his life so well. I am reminded of the movie Braveheart, when the men saw William Wallace for the first time. It wasn't much different from when the captain first walked through the doors of 3-truck. It was whispered, "This can't be the man they call Paddy Brown. He's not big enough. Paddy Brown is 8 feet tall." Well, he wasn't that big, but his heart was. That is the burden of being a legend, one that Paddy carried with tremendous grace and humility. To hear the stories and legend of Captain Brown was to be inspired, but to actually meet the man, to be led by him, to follow him down that long, dark, smoky hallway was to be blessed because Paddy's strength, courage, and experience were a tremendous comfort in tough times. It was at this point in his eulogy that Big Mike Moran started to choke up. Swallowing the tears before they could spill out, and with a crack in his voice, he pushed forward. When you went to Cap with a request or a problem, his usual reply went along the lines of, "Don't worry, we'll see what we can do. We'll take care of it. Anything for the men." So I can only imagine how it was in those final moments of September 11th. Captain Brown leading his men, helping 30 to 40 severely burned people down those dark stairs. Paddy giving maydays that saved many other firemen's lives, but he and his men refusing to leave those people behind. I can see the guys from 3-truck turning one last time to Paddy and being comforted by a nod of his head, a shy smile. "Don't worry, fellas, we'll take care of it." And they were inspired. So this marks the 12th and final funeral for the men of Ladder 3, and it is fitting that Paddy go last. The last man out. Paddy never would have left any building until all his men were out. He couldn't leave the scene or firehouse until all his men were accounted for. He would even come in on his days off to take care of the things for the guys. Mike Moran then lost the battle with the tears. They overtook him as he finished. So on behalf of the surviving members of Ladder 3, you can take up now, Cap. All your men have been cared for, and they have gone home. You should join them and rest easy. Any problems that come up, don't worry. We'll take care of them, for you taught us well. You taught us the Paddy Brown way. Deafening applause and a standing ovation followed as Mike walked down the steps of the altar. This was it, the final memorial for 3-truck. Time for their courageous captain to go home. Time for the surviving members of Ladder 3 to take up. They had taken care of 13 funerals and memorial, one for Mike's own brother, a chief in special ops. They had stood as honor guard, marched in formation, comforted the devastated families, tried to answer unanswerable questions, held their lost brothers' kids, and they had done it all with patience, professionalism, compassion, and class. Whatever you want, Mike, is what I was told over and over, and despite the hundreds of services, Ladder 3 made me feel as if Pat had been the only one. I'm sure they did that for every family. I looked around St. Patrick's Cathedral at all the grandeur fit for a president or pope, filled with palpable love for my brother and all the love that went into the planning. Pat's close friends, both in and out of the fire department, made sure that this event was going to be perfect. They knew that Paddy Brown's wishes were fulfilled. I could hear Pat say, "Yeah, guys, this is exactly what I wanted." And with that, I'm going to stop reading from the book. There's many other stories and people that are important to the story. There's also a major piece at the very end after the memorial about a tree being planted in Central Park, and that is a tremendous piece to this story, but I don't want to give that away. I believe it's worth reading the whole story and coming to that at the end. But what I did want to put in here was the last audio transmission of Captain Brown in the North Tower, because I think it's important to hear his actual voice instead of just reading from a book. Although there's a lot of videos on YouTube about him and his career and many rescues and everything, I think this piece, this last 10, 15 seconds of what you hear of him saying in the North Tower is big. The professionalism, his demeanor amongst the probably one of the most chaotic scenes he's ever been in, and his men and all the first responders and civilians that were a part of that day on 9/11. So I just want to play this audio and then start wrapping up this bonus episode.
Captain Brown, ladder 3. I'm at the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
I'm on the 35th floor. Okay?
Okay.
Just relayed to the command post. We're trying to get up. There's numerous civilians in all stairwells. Numerous burn injuries are coming down. I'm trying to send them down first. Apparently, it's above the 75th floor. I don't know if they got that yet, okay?
Okay.
It's a free truck, and we're still heading up, all right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think that says it right there. Just listening to his voice and at the very end saying thank you in one of the most chaotic scenarios that any of us could have been put in. And as we wrap up this special bonus episode, I want to go back to the introduction and read a postscript piece that Dr. Brown had put in there that isn't in the earlier versions of the book. But I want to read this section because I think it's important as we bring and wrap this story up, this little bit of the surface that we've touched of it. But as I read postscript here, since I wrote this book, I've lost my partner, my editor, my one true love of my life, my warrior, Janet. If I were granted the opportunity to relive 30 years without Janet, I would decline. She died from a 13-year battle against breast cancer, and not once did she consider herself as a cancer survivor. Janet was a warrior. During that time of cytotoxic nightmares, multiple major surgeries and radiation treatments, Janet graduated magna cum laude from UNLV School of Business, volunteered for American Cancer Society, and even became a tap dancer. 2 nights before she passed, she said she would save a spot for me next to her in heaven. She fulfilled my life. She and my brother inspired me to write our story. Recently, I was diagnosed with cancer. It appears that this cancer is directly related to my time on the pile at Ground Zero. This third round of loss, my brother, my wife, and my life as I knew it, seems to be a 360-degree circle of loss, mourning, and negotiating with what's left of life. It's tragic, at times funny, and always, it's real. That was the message of what brothers do, and the message that I will try to forward into what may be my final book, End of One. We responders, the survivors, the downtown Manhattan residents, and all our families and friends assumed that the attack ended on 9/11/2001. We now realize that the attack continues with the toxic time bombs that are growing inside each of us. We are Americans. We are fighters. We are all in this together, and we never forget. As I participate in the World Trade Center health program for my cancer treatment, I feel even more connected with the families who have survived 9/11, the people like me who are battling for their lives, and even more inspired by memories of my warrior, Janet. Read my book and others like it, and teach the young who are now living with the aftermath how to feel and fight. Don't let them forget what happened or who we lost. Life is not fair, but it's worth it. I will give advice to anyone who is diagnosed with cancer. Be a warrior like Janet. Do not let anyone make decisions for you. It is your body, your mind, your life. Take strength from those who went before you. You'll need it in the days ahead. As I set down the book and finished reading that last piece, that I'm going to do today, I look on my desk and I'm looking at a picture of Dr. Brown, because unfortunately on October 30th of 2020, we lost Dr. Brown to this cancer that he describes. And it's just another component to this whole story. And as heavy as this episode has been, I think it's important that the story continues. And I hate that we have to end it with saying that Mike's not with us either. So not only is Janet, Patty, and Mike gone, but what's not gone is the ability to tell this story, to keep their memories and all the first responders, civilians that we lost that day up until this current time. We need to continue to tell this story, not let it be forgotten. And I think that's the most important part that we'll take away from this bonus episode. And as I stated, it's a heavy episode, one that's important to hear, and that I feel that we should continue to pass on the story and the many other stories that are like it, that maybe aren't written in a book, but can be told, because remember, we're still alive and we need to keep those stories going. We need to take care of each other. I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting tired of the just continuous hate and division that's happening. And I think we can get through that and we can be better. And we need to realize how important it is to live life, because one day it's going to come to an end. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be sitting on my deathbed with regrets. Every day that we wake up is a bonus, is an extra day, another day to do good, to help somebody out, to pay it forward, whatever it may be. Those little things that we do that don't always get credit, but it's going to make us feel better and make somebody else feel better. So as I wrap up this episode, I just want to say thank you for taking this time to listen to this bonus episode. Please leave any comments, suggestions. I'm going to link the book in the show notes, and I appreciate your time. God bless Paddy Brown, God bless Janet Brown, and God bless Dr. Mike Brown, and God bless America. May we never forget. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this special bonus episode of the Fire Officer Project. You can follow us on Instagram at the Fire Officer Project, or we would appreciate any comments, critiques, questions, topic ideas for future shows. Also, you can leave a rating and a review on the podcast platform that you're listening to. And if you prefer, we have an email, thefireofficerproject@gmail.com. We'd appreciate any comments, suggestions, anything that you have. Once again, thank you very much for listening. Remember, keep moving forward.